Greetings, one and all. This is going to be the first official review that I do over here. We have started the reviews of The Mandalorian as well, but this is the first actual film review that I've done. We're going to be keeping score as to where this video falls on a scale of 0 to 10. And so this film was a very interesting one to me. And we're going to go over some of the pros and the cons that this film had, as well as some of the ways that it could have actually been improved upon. So, for starters, just a general overview, this film was definitely one that held one's attention, and it was something that also kept good suspense. It had good action, but there were a great many problems that happened as well, and some things that I think that limited where the film could have actually gone. Just because I am flying solo right now, please be sure to tell me if there's any problems with the audio or the visuals. That would be great. Greetings, Roll and Shares, welcome. This film review will also be edited down if there is the need for it in the future, but otherwise it's just going to stay in the live stream. This is not going to be a very long review. The film was not very long, and thus it doesn't need to be a super long review for this. Up front, I had no expectations about this film going in. Apparently, people have been looking forward to this film for many, many years. I think the film was first announced in 2020, and ever since then, people have been anticipating that this was going to be, in their own words, the words of the fans that were anticipating this. They said that it was going to be Planet of the Apes meets dinosaurs. Honestly, it sounds very compelling, very interesting. And so when you have that sort of introduction to a film, anticipation of what it's going to be like has been set. The bar has been raised. Planet of the Apes has a very good following. And so when you say this is going to be like Planet of the Apes, just with dinosaurs, honestly, it's probably setting yourself up for failure. And this film kind of did that. Now, granted, some of the criticisms that are out there of the film are accurate. Some of them are inaccurate. I did see a couple of them just to kind of get a general idea of what it was going to be like and what to expect. But overall, I was still pleasantly surprised by some areas and also disappointed in others. So, film is about dinosaurs. That's all I really knew going into this. Film is about dinosaurs and people that crash land on a planet full of dinosaurs. Now, I didn't know what 65 had to do with any of this. I didn't realize initially that it had to do with a time frame. 65 could have been a very generic number, and some people have said that they should have just stuck with 65 and not mentioned anything else, and they would have had better expectations for people. This film struggled in a great many ways. It didn't have a lot of dialogue. It didn't have a whole lot of story. The visuals were good in some areas, and in other areas they were lacking. But this film felt like they were trying to go for this sort of approach, trying to offer suspense and a fandom, but ended up looking kind of like this. It's not the most compelling dinosaur story that could have been made. And that's not to say that it's a bad film. It's just to say that the expectations were that it was going to be something spectacular, and we are left with something less than spectacular. Now, as we do this review, we're going to be on using this for our scoring. Each of these values is going to be only one. We're going to change this in the future just to try and see if there's better ways to approach this. But right now, we are going to be going with the plot overview, the actor overview, the design, and the action. And altogether, these things will be graded, turned into a percentage, and we will get a final number. You will see the score up above, and that will keep changing as we go along. For our starters, I would like to mention the plot, because the plot of a story really is critical to the film's success. Now, granted, I have actually known a couple of people in the world of film and animation who don't think that plot is good to kind of gauge a film's quality by. I'm not entirely sure where this idea came from. I think it came from people that were a little lazy, but that's my personal opinion on it. Overall, though, plot is seeming to fade in some films, in some film genres, and this film suffered from that. It very much suffered from it. There were a great many moments that could have been really inspiring, even chilling, but those opportunities were not taken. Each of the main plot points are supposed to kind of help propel a story to its conclusion, not to serve as eye-catching moments. Yes, a good plot needs to be eye-catching, but you got to be careful that the eye-catching features actually correspond to the plot. A great many films are guilty of this, and not just this one. For this film, though, we start off with a very interesting setup. There is the character who needs to go and try and find a way to make extra money. His daughter is suffering. She is in poor medical health, and they need the funds to help pay for some very extensive medical procedures. Honestly, good, compelling start to a story. Now, the first thing that stood out to me, though, and I don't have any images of this, is the home world that these characters come from. The film starts off by us flying through space and coming upon a galaxy and going into the galaxy to a solar system and then a planet. That's where the story begins. We have no idea where this place is. We have no idea where they're going. All we know is that they're somewhere out in space, kind of similar to how Star Wars begins. All we know is that this is a spacefaring race, and they're dealing with very real dilemmas. Someone is ill. Someone's trying to make a living in this very foreign alien world, and he's trying to find a way to be a good father. Now, he ends up taking this mission to go into deep space in order to help traffic goods and people. Now, we are given very little introduction to this race of people. We're given very little introduction to the culture that they come from. I think from start to finish, it was less than 5 minutes. And once they leave planet, we are immediately into action. Asteroids hit their vessel. And by the way, I'm not telling you anything that hasn't been in the trailer already. Asteroids hit the structure and of the structural components of the spacecraft, and it starts to fall apart. And he does a crash landing. Everybody on board perishes except for himself. And as he finds out that there is a little girl who survives as well. What we don't know is that he has actually been awake for this entire time of almost a 2-year journey. So I'm guessing it's somewhere about a year into it that he has been staying up, monitoring the ship, while everyone else is in a hibernation state. During that time, he has been receiving messages, he's been sending messages, and life has, for him, is very different than the people that are waking up, in particular this little girl. She has no idea what has happened. He, though, has been dealing with a lot of drama as he's been still receiving messages from his daughter. Again, fairly good setup for a story. Now, it was a little quick, but it was still fairly decent. When I look at this plotline, though, how you set it up is only part of it. Where it goes from there, how you use those starting elements, needs to contribute to the middle of the story and the end. While it does contribute, it actually doesn't color a whole lot of the story. And I think the reason why is because of what I said earlier. It lacks dialogue. Dialogue is so crucial to actually making a film feel like it is compelling. And it doesn't do that. Instead, we use visuals and action to convey most of the story, and almost literally grunts. I'm not saying that the actors are grunting on camera, but what they're saying has so little value in terms of dialogue, it might as well have been grunts. In terms of where I think it stands, though, with the plot overall of that, they're crash landed and now they need to get off. They need to find a way to get rescued. That, though, is compelling. And the main character now has to try and find a way to rescue this little girl, even though he himself has all this baggage. And he's overall, I think that though the plot gets a very soft point there. I don't think that is compelling, but I can still see that it was a good setup. It could have been better. Could have been better thought out. But overall, a decent start. Then we come to the build-up. The build-up of the story that kind of gets us to the middle point of where this film was. We are slowly fed information about the main character, and he has to try and shift his priorities from his daughter now to this little girl that he's having to protect. This shift is actually done really well, and I started having hope for the film as this was starting to unfold. All this is happening while they're now trying to explore a mysterious planet, this one that they've crash landed on. The mystery setup is good. It could have been better. As many things in this film, it could have been better. One of the ways that they try and introduce mystery is when he first gets off his ship. He's starting to walk off, trying to find anyone who is a survivor, and we see a fin, or the ridge on the back of a creature, come up out of the water and go back down, almost like it was from The Empire Strikes Back. A very similar sort of feel when on Dagobah. And so you're half expecting the main character to get attacked, and that just adds a lot of mystery and suspense. People are on the edge of their seat. What's going to happen? Later on, the main character finds a claw on the ground. He has yet to actually see any of these creatures face to face. He finds a claw on the ground, and he holds it up and realizes it's probably belongs to a predator of some kind. And he keeps walking down his way, trying to find survivors. And he comes to this carcass. And this carcass gives him some idea of scale of these creatures. And the audience is still left thinking, what incarnations is this? Unless you watch the trailer, then you realize very much that this is all just going to be dinosaurs, or dinosaur-like creatures. He proceeds on to a cliff, and he's looking down, and he sees a T-Rex. He's then attacked by a very small creature. And this is where some of their mystery started. It could have been better. He has a moment where he's looking at the creature that he has just killed, a very small one, and he sees that the claw on the creature is very similar to the one he had found earlier. What they could have done, though, that would have actually made it better, is they could have actually looked at the creature and then had him hold up the claw, and it would have actually given him a comparison of the creature's size versus the claw that he has in his hand. And that should have caused him to maybe have a little bit of a panic as he starts to put two and two together, and he realizes he's on a planet full of gigantic creatures that are carnivorous and dangerous. But yet that doesn't happen. That moment happens when he comes across a giant footprint. It still added to the mystery. It still was well done, but it could have been better. Then we come to the climax of the film. The climax is a very generic apocalypse timer, where the world is coming to an end, quick, got to escape. It doesn't carry a whole lot of interest, and I think that's because the apocalypse timer strategy has been overused. Far too often, these films are in need of some sort of terrible villain or some sort of time frame that they have to act so they can thus justify bringing the film to a very abrupt end. It adds some suspense, but I don't think it's very compelling. In that sense, I give the build-up, even though it's not great, I still give that a 1. And the climax, I know that people like it, but I don't. But I still have to give that a 1. Because both of the build-up and the climax, while it fails at where it could have gone, still matches with what is kind of expected of films like this. But what about the overall feel from start to finish? The overall feel of the film feels cheap. From the first scene, we start getting this idea that their budget was tight. And that's seen in the generic alien world that they're around. There's no buildup at the home planet. There's no real emphasis upon this culture that they're coming from. And that is all money-saving tactics. They are making sure that you don't spend a whole lot of time actually dwelling on where these people come from. You just want to get to the action. Well, unfortunately, this stuff is all designed, well, all these things should be designed to help improve the overall feel of the story, and it's not. If they had delved into the culture, if they had delved into these backstories, maybe added more dialogue, you would have had a very different feel. Whereas instead, we just are left with a generic monster film. And that, I think, is one of the biggest problems of this film, is that it is nothing more than every other film. So while the story may have been compelling to some folks, it's just a repeat. So I give that a loss. Could have been so much better. Then as for the actors themselves, this is probably going to take some people by surprise. Because based upon the overviews I was seeing, people seem to really dislike Mills in this story. Adam Driver has had quite a few people that are not fans of him. I, on the other hand, actually really like his character. I think he's the most compelling element of this story. His ability to convey emotion on screen, while to some it might seem like overacting, it also helps to capture a lot of the most important moments. He has a lot of adrenaline that he can basically turn on for the screen, and I think that he does a great job in this role. Ever since I first saw him in Star Wars, I've always thought that he is one of the best elements to these to films like this. And I look forward to seeing where he goes from here. I personally think that this film had a massive improvement just by having him as the main character. If they put in someone else, I'm not sure that that someone else would have carried the weight that needed to happen for somebody who needed to show that level of adrenaline. But that's my personal opinion on that. Thanks, Diskette, for showing support over there. Much appreciated. What about the supporting actor? So let's give that a 1 for the lead. But what about the supporting actor? Koa, the little girl who is with Mills, crashed on this planet, is not as compelling. Now, I'm not being necessarily cruel to her in that sense, because I think that the studio failed to give her good lines. For those who have seen the film, you know exactly what I'm referring to. She speaks in a different language. And so then, opportunities where they could have been dialoguing, have the two characters that are stranded on the same planet talking together, those moments that could have added to the feel and the bond that they have, gone. Instead, they are saying the same words over and over again, trying to convey to the other person what they're trying to mean. And it just doesn't connect. Her character also is, we'll say generic, is incredibly generic for a little girl in a film like this. Because she can't speak, we don't know any sort of backstory, we don't know any sort of personality that could have helped us to understand her better, maybe drawn a more of a connection with her. Not there. So I give that a loss. What about the extras? wait, this is a film with just two people, basically. Well, technically there's a third, and I would argue there's a fourth. The third is, well, actually, no, there's technically five. The third is his daughter that we see on screen multiple times, but she's not engaging with him. It's more just messages that are coming in. We see his wife. His wife is there for a very short time at the start of the film. But then we're left with this handheld device that speaks to him. That is your other supporting actor, your extra. All these characters don't necessarily add a whole lot to the story, but they're crucial to setting up the next scenes. So many times, the one that was helping to move the story along was actually this handheld device. So I count it as an actor. That being said, it was actually done in such a way that it made it interesting. So even though it wasn't great, it could be seen as a success. But because they already didn't have any extra actors, this is all we have to go with. I'm actually going to give that as a positive. Again, not a fan of this approach, but for the limitations that they gave their actors, this was actually done decent. But then we come to the problem of our actors, and I hinted at this earlier, and that was the language barrier. Tension, thus, has a very bizarre feel to it. Tension in this story is trying to use sign language, it's trying to use words and trying to communicate, trying to help educate each other on different words to use. It could have been done well, but the way that they did it lacked some important key elements. One of them is that you should have been using the same word over and over so that the audience would actually want to try and listen in, trying to lean in and listen for the word that the little girl says, or listen for if Adam Driver is going to actually be able to start to understand. Then he starts conveying some words back. But for the whole part of it, they're not really trying to understand each other a whole lot. They're trying to communicate, but they're not really trying to understand. And as someone who has tried to deal with foreign languages quite a bit, there's some strategies that you can go about to try and understand one another. I don't think that they did that for this film, and it would have actually added some really funny dynamics for them. Whereas this just felt like generic stuff that written by people that don't actually know how to write a story for characters who can't communicate. They were writing action, and they didn't write dialogue. And what's more, they didn't write dialogue that could have transcended the language barrier. In that sense, I give this a loss. And believe me, this is probably one of my biggest complaints of the film. The lack of dialogue, the lack of communication. Very problematic for the story. Well, some people might say, well, that's not as important as other elements, but you can have a film that has all dialogue and no action. But it's really hard to have a film that has all action and no dialogue. Stories that are told only by word actually have pretty good longevity in our culture. Generic action does not. What about the design of the film? Overall, I think the design was decent. Again, I think that some of the best design elements were at the start when they're setting up the story. And those elements start to disappear as we are introduced to more of the survival elements of the story. More of the dinosaurs or things like that. But as for the elements of the spacecraft, for example, we actually get some good snapshots of the culture that they're in. And I think that it was very helpful to understanding more about these people. But again, they didn't spend enough time, so we are left with just these as our only way to understand the culture. Visual effects of the story, very well done. In that, I give that a win for them. In terms of world building, trying to establish their culture through this design, even just establishing the world that they're on, I have to say it's a loss. A lot of the elements of their culture was not explored enough, and the elements of the foreign alien world that they've crash landed on are not really done either. They're focusing primarily on this monster aspect of the story. And so the intrigue that could have been built up by introducing basically a culture of the natural world around them. I'm not saying that the animals are having some sort of societies or nations or whatnot. I'm not saying that. But I am saying they needed some way to show that you're on a world that has an established order. A good example is if you were to watch the film Jurassic Park. I'm not saying Jurassic World, I'm saying Jurassic Park. You see moments where both herbivores and carnivores are aggressive, and also when they're not. You see herds. You see animals kind of living together. Now, I think that it could have been better, but overall, they show that there is a sort of order to this natural world that you're in. This world that they've crash landed onto is to serve one purpose: to be monsters. That's not really world building. And so, what about realism, though? Realism is actually decent. I think the realism of the story was, in terms of the visual effects, very well done. Flying particles actually looked like they were there. Lighting effects were great. The alien world around them actually was believable. I did feel like I was on a completely different planet. There were times where I felt like I was on just remote areas of Earth. But overall, well done. Now, what about the action? The action that everybody kept praising the story over. The action was generic. It unfortunately just did not have any sort of believability. It was all designed basically on a storyboard. If that. Most likely it was designed on a computer as they're jumping through with animatics trying to figure out how to best frame the story. And they focus so much on the effects and the action that I feel like the editors probably spent too much time on that and not enough time on actually editing any of the more interesting scenes that would have shown the survival aspects. And by the way, if you've looked into some of the deleted scenes, which there's a couple of them out there, you come to understand that there's actually quite a bit of story that was being built up, and all of it got thrown away for more action. But believability, it was very, very poorly done. So I put that as a loss. What about easy to follow? Now, what do I mean by this? Action needs to have cause and effect. It needs to be properly framed. It needs to be, you have to have a sense of the danger, a sense of what is transpiring. In that sense, this film actually did a good job. Framing was great. And that's the other point, which is whether it's close-up or framed. It was framed, it was easy to follow, and so in both of those categories, I give both of those a victory. What about key poses, though? If you look online, you will see a surprising lack of imagery used for this film. That is not a good sign. The reason why is because for a film like this, you kind of need to have moments that the audience can step away and say, I remember that scene. That was just so very striking. A good example would be Star Wars. George Lucas was determined that during each scene, each action scene, you would have kind of a key moment that the heroes would pause on, and they would be able to be remembered by the audience as they left the theater. A good example would be the battle on Mustafar. There's a couple of scenes that don't add a whole lot to the action. They're like pauses. They're a moment that two characters freeze enough for the image to be embedded into the audience's mind. That is lacking in this story, other than moments like this. It's suspense, but it's not a dramatic pose during the fight, not a dramatic pose in the middle of the action. Because of that lack of key poses, that is definitely a loss. All right, stand by just a second. So when we come down to it, this starts to actually average out to a 6 out of 10. I don't have that number up on the screen, but I will put it up later on. But I definitely think that this film is a solid 6 out of 10. But there's something else besides just the overall story that I want you to kind of think about. There's some people out there that are starting to ask some questions, because this film was advertised that this is going to be dinosaurs. And early on, I started hearing about, this is going to be a very different approach to dinosaurs. It's going to be a very realistic one. It's not going to be like the silly Jurassic Park films. Well, I don't know when this changed, but sometime between the screenings that people were given feedback on and when the film actually came out, we started to see these dinosaurs change, and they started to become monsters. Suddenly, this believability, which was seen in the trailers, like, oh, look how realistic that is, all fell apart when you saw the creatures in their reality. We were left with a reminder of the Indominus Rex and the Indoraptor when we started to see the dinosaurs in this film. That was very shocking to me, actually. I thought for certain they were going to be going off of the bone structures of these dinosaurs. And I saw more aliens in that film than actual dinosaurs. Creatures that should have been authentic, believable, were replaced with just generic monstrosities. Mutants of the dinosaur bone record. They had aggressive tendencies. They were all carnivorous monsters that were hungry for everything and anything. Nothing would stop their appetite. They had to kill everything, even when there was a fresh kill right there on the ground for them to eat. They had to go for something else. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous for a movie like this, because in the end, it's just Hollywood not understanding how nature works. Nature has very much kind of an order to how carnivores are going to behave. They're going to be hungry, yes. They're going to be wanting to get vengeance in some cases, but they're not mindless killing machines. They don't just go around and have a constant feeding frenzy. If you look at videos of Africa, for example, you will see lions laying down on the ground, and you will see things like zebras walk right up to them. They are completely unafraid because they know that the lions are not in hunt mode. they're in rest mode. And so you can have all these creatures dancing around them, not actually changing a thing. But then, suddenly, they can turn on a dime and become hungry again. But not in this film. In this film, they're always hungry all the time and always need to go on the attack. Very poorly done. And what's more, when a predator gets wounded, it usually pulls away. Unless it's a certain type of predator, then it will stay on the attack. But anyway, generic monsters. And this one, which I will not mention anything specific about it, but this one on the film was far more shocking to me than it was very shocking. All the other creatures that I had seen up to that point paled in comparison to the weirdness of this one. And if you understand what these creatures looked like in the fossil record, you know how far off the reservation they got with this one. This one is truly the reincarnation of the Indominus Rex. It is a monstrosity, and it is a mad, wild killing machine with absolutely no logic and nothing more than just big, massive teeth. So how do you approach the concept of dinosaurs? I mean, for most films like this, you want to have jump scares. But why? Well, it's because, in the end, we have been fed this idea that a dinosaur movie is a monster movie. These creatures need to be savage killing machines. They need to be mindless, always on the attack. This is not a very good way to approach a film like this, and I think that's why the story fails. Sure, there's the other elements that I mentioned earlier of why it struggled, but this one actually shows that the foundation for why they made this film is flawed. They didn't make a movie that was designed to tell a compelling story about two people stranded on a planet. No, they made it with the whole purpose of trying to make dinosaurs attacking people and them having to survive. That is your plot line. That's why it is generic and why it will not last more than a year or two. This film will fall into obscurity very soon. Some say it already has. Some reviews out there say it never even had a chance to succeed at all. So how do you address the concept? And we're getting to the how they could have actually improved upon this. How do you actually make a dinosaur movie that is compelling? You have gigantic creatures, which, by the way, are really hard to do jump scares with because you can see them coming from a mile away. How do you do it? Well, I think that if they were to do a different approach with the dinosaurs, they could have their monster movie. Scares are not jump scares. Scares are not things that are utterly grotesque or mutated so that we start to think that it's something completely different, that we think it's an alien or a monster. No, you just have to approach it based upon how animals in the real world behave. The larger the creature, the more stealthy it needs to be. The most dangerous creature in the continent of Asia is the tiger. And it stalks its prey. It uses camouflage. And when you realize it's there, it's usually too late. And then it has a burst of speed to be able to chase things down. It's a nocturnal hunter. And some people have reported, as I've heard, that it can actually use a sort of psychological terror when stalking things. It will actually cause sounds to happen, and it's like, why was it so careless? Some people think it's designed to cause people to be spooked. Well, what if you're to do something similar with the dinosaur? You have it hunting primarily in the night. You have lighting effects to make it more terrifying to you. And you have this slow, unstoppable, basically killing machine that's coming towards you. You could have actually done something where you didn't need jump scares, and it probably would have been more terrifying to the audience, but it would have raised the cost of the film through the roof, because jump scares are quick, they're easy, and they take no money. Trying to do a build-up, trying to figure out what's got to be done to make something carry that weight and slowly instill fear in somebody, that's a lot harder to do. It's something that Jurassic Park actually did well with the first film. When Rexy first appears, a lot of people freaked out because it was believable, it was in the moment, it was not necessarily fast, it was unstoppable. But then we come to another area. So that's how you do like a good Predator. But what about in terms of the plotline itself? What could you have done differently to make it more compelling? Well, I would have actually had it to where, if you're starting from the very beginning of the story, have it to where the characters are introduced, have each of them with a backstory, and have it that both of them are trying to understand each other as they're trying to go through the story, not just in language, but also in terms of why they're behaving the way they are. Why is one guy is trying to throw away his life, and the other one, where this little girl is kind of blissfully ignorant and kind of always pushing the envelope. And as they're going along, they start to figure out that they're surrounded by these creatures that are far more cunning than they anticipated, and give them a need to try and get off-world, because both of them come to the realization that they both have something to live for. I think personally, if you took that approach, you probably would have had a bit more of a compelling narrative for the audience. And now, granted, I've not refined that idea a whole lot, but that's just the general idea of where I think the story could have gone. So in summary, I think this film had potential. It fell short. It could have been far better if they had just taken a different approach to the main characters, to the overall plot line, and how they introduced their monsters into their movie, or the dinosaurs. In closing, though, this film has another aspect to it. It's a worldview. It's compelling in the sense of that some people are going to be more drawn to this story than others. I myself am not drawn to this film for a variety of reasons. One of them is the messaging that they put in the film. I'm not talking about the plot line. I'm talking about the message for the film. This film focuses on the message of evolution. That is not compelling to me. I'm someone who is very much a young Earth creationist. That's not a very popular opinion out there, but in part it's because when I do my research into this world of the ancient Earth, I see enough evidence there to cause me to doubt that things are millions of years old. So the film's not made for someone like me, but I can look past that and still enjoy it for the plot line that it had. But just so you know, that is a bit of an element to the story. There is that messaging, even though it's subtle. But overall, I think it's a solid 6 out of 10. A decent film for people that want a generic action film, but not compelling enough for those who want a more in-depth, compelling narrative that could have taken the film to the next level. Anyway, that will be our first review. Thanks everyone for joining in and stopping by. If anybody is a fan of this film, be sure to mention. Otherwise, we'll be closing out here in about 2 minutes. I did want to mention one last element about the story, and that is the reviews that are currently out there. Now, granted, I'm not diving into this with trying to give a really hardcore set of views on set of reviews in the sense of that I think that this actor should have been looking in this direction. I think this actor should have been using this dialect instead. I've actually seen some people saying that like the personalities are way off, but I have seen that there is a difference. The audiences seem to like it more. The critics seem to not like it. I'm somewhere that in between. I didn't like it. I didn't hate it. It was a generic monster movie. We have Dadman Walking stopping by. Well, thanks for coming by, Dadman Walking. Just wrapping up here. But overall, be sure to tell me if this is a film that you would think that I got wrong in terms of my score. The official score, I'm going to create an area where I give like an official score somewhere else. It will not be on this video. So thanks everyone for stopping by, and we're going to be closing out. Have a pleasant day, one and all.